Hi everyone, Ben here to continue our series on analyzing and commentating on the WBC Finals Barista Championship sets. We are going to finish up 2022. There's only 2 people left, and then we're going to jump straight into 2023, covering all that content. There's so many good sets, and I'm super excited to get through all of them. So next up is Claire Wallace, the Barista Champion of the United Kingdom. Claire had a really great run, actually performed well both in the semis and the finals. Something interesting to note though is Claire had a bit of a mistake in the first round, which could have kept her out of semis and out of finals. I think this speaks to the importance of having multiple rounds. I think it also makes it really interesting when you start to think about how Brewers Cup has a semifinals round now. I think that it's really important because in the second 2 rounds she crushed it. We're going to watch her final set and then go through all of it.
Perfect. And time. Good morning, judges. My name is Claire, and I am so excited to be here today. The future of flavor in coffee is fermentation with intention. Our history with fermentation has been functional, but there's a new wave of producers who are using knowledge and precision to craft the flavor profiles that they want using fermentation. So the coffee that I'm serving you today is the greatest example of this. But before we dive in more, I'll just be preparing a few ingredients for my signature drink, including my signature drink espressos, to allow them to cool for a little bit later. I'll be using the same espresso recipe for each course, a dose of 20 grams in, and a yield of 39 grams out, as I found that this gave me the best overall tactile experience in this coffee of a medium weight and a juicy texture. My brewing temperature today is 94 degrees, as I found that this gave me an extraction that best highlighted the flavor balance and the high quality sweetness in this coffee. So my coffee today is produced by Dr. Mauricio Chata at his farm, Finca La Negrita, located at 1,900 meters above sea level in the Tolima region of Colombia.
So really interesting off the top, Claire does something that I think is really smart. In basically 1 minute, under a minute, she gave her entire theme. She prepped her signature drink ingredient and went straight to prepping coffee. I think if you have a theme that is easy to grasp, her theme is about fermentation. This is something that the judges have been hearing about all week in small pieces. But what Claire's doing here is taking that as a theme. So there's not a lot of backstory or explanation required. You can just say what you're doing and then you're straight in. You can see that she also prepped an ingredient while she was talking. I'm interested to see what that becomes later on. Another thing that you can see here is Claire is doing 3 handles for her signature drink. You'll see this in a moment. I think this is also interesting. I don't totally know the reason why. A lot of people have been doing 3 handle pulls for signature drink ingredients. It might give you more espresso if you were wanting to have multiple sips. I guess we'll see what happens. Another thing that I think is really interesting to comment on that I think has become more of a trend as we've moved away from the EK and now we're using Mythos grinders at Worlds, is many people are just using one grinder. Claire is using one recipe, which makes it really easy to explain. One grinder, that means one roast. To me, it both speaks to the quality of this coffee, that you can use just one roast in one setting for all your courses. It also speaks to the quality of roast, that Claire's the person that roasted this coffee, which means she did a heck of a job roasting it.
Now, I think that this region's the best in the world for producing coffee. So in addition to that altitude, he also benefits from cool temperatures, abundant shade, and volcanic soil, which means that his coffee already has excellent taste balance. I'm serving you today Mauricio's naturally processed Sidra cultivar. It's a hybrid between Typica and Red Bourbon. Now, Sidra has amazing flavors already, but the reason I'm serving you this Sidra today is purely because of the flavors that Mauricio has managed to create using intentional fermentation. But how has he managed to do this? Well, as you can see in front of you, illustrated on those cards, fermentation in coffee is when yeast or bacteria consume the sugar within the coffee cherry to produce energy. But in addition to energy, this process also generates many other new compounds. These can diffuse into the green coffee seed, changing its chemical composition
So really interesting here. I think Claire, again, it shows the brilliance of this set by just talking about the fermentation process and the variety. It's both the theme and it's getting a lot of info on the farm. I think this is a really smart theme to let you do a lot of content. She's using a Sidra. This is a super popular variety lately. I think it just has great taste balance. It also has good body. One thing that you can notice here, and this is a bit of a risk reward thing for people watching, it looks like the middle handle is pulling a little bit faster. I think it dropped really quick too. There might be a channel there. I'm only pointing this out because this also happened to me this year in Athens. But the risk reward is, I think you always want to, as much as possible, if you can pull your sig drink shots first, that's really important, because if you do have a channel, it's going to go into your signature drink shots. Mine went into my espressos. The other thing that you can do is potentially purge if you want, especially one of the things that I think hasn't happened in WBC yet is people haven't adjusted their routines based on the round. I haven't, and I should have. If you, in the first round, you have a tech judge, it's worth 72 points, or 71. In the next rounds, you don't have a tech judge. And so you could actually completely change your set to make it faster, to maybe make better coffee with no cost other than the head judge. They have 6 points to reward you. But let's be honest, they're not going to drop down to like a 2 if you decide to waste some coffee. So I think in the future, we'll see more strategies around how people use the different rounds and the different scores that are available.
And its flavor. So by selecting a particular type of yeast or bacteria and controlling its environment, producers can elevate and craft the flavor of their coffee. And that is exactly what Mauricio has done with this Sidra. So he starts by picking the cherries when they reach a ripeness level of 20 bricks, as this has the best overall sugar content available for his fermentation. Then he floats the cherries in a solution of sodium hypochlorite, and this will cleanse off any indigenous yeast or bacteria that could interfere with his fermentation. Then the cherries are placed in a stainless steel tank, and they're inoculated with a specific yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, commonly known as baker's yeast. And it's this yeast that allows Mauricio to create the flavor clarity and vibrant acidity you'll experience in this espresso.
One thing you'll notice throughout Claire's entire presentation is she was able to take sort of a complicated topic about fermentation and distill it into really simple phrases that are easy to remember, easy to follow. I think this is one of the hardest things about barista competitions. She does it very, very well. Even if you go back and look at when she talked about fermentation, how it's the way that these organisms are producing energy, but it produces byproducts. I've never heard a more succinct way to describe some of these processes, and I think that's also why she did really well. She was able to fit a ton of material into a nice, easy package that the judges could understand and follow along with.
The tank is kept in a temperature-controlled dark room that gets no hotter than 18 degrees Celsius. And the pH is constantly monitored to get no higher than 4.5. Without this level of control, Mauricio would not be able to craft the fruit flavors in this espresso of a red currant and plum. The fermentation lasts for 48 hours, and during this time, the tank is being constantly flushed with nitrogen. This is to remove the fermentation byproducts carbon dioxide and carbonic acid. These can create astringent flavors in coffee. And so by removing them, Mauricio ensures that this coffee has a long-lasting finish. Finally, the coffee is dried for 6 weeks at 20 degrees Celsius in order to preserve all of those flavors. Thank you. All of this work distills down into a coffee that just gets better as it cools. So judges, I'll serve you these espressos. Just assess the crema. Don't drink until I ask you to do so. So along with that red currant and plum, you'll also get notes in this espresso of dried cherry, marzipan, and baker's chocolate. The weight is medium. The texture, juicy. And the finish long-lasting, there we are, and lingering with that baker's chocolate. Thank you very much. Now, judges, when I've served the last espresso, thank you, please stir front to back 15 times to cool before popping your spoons in those green jars to your left. And please enjoy.
So interesting tasting notes. I think sometimes when I watch barista competitions, I don't know how much of it is sometimes strategic in calls, because I think there's a whole game there. By Claire called plum, currant, almond, and baker's chocolate. I think those are all great notes. Sounds like a delicious espresso. Something like plum to me is, it's not as specific a flavor as something like other stone fruit like peach. And so I think it's a really smart one where you call it's a stone fruit, it has some acidity, but it doesn't have an intense flavor. Like we can all think of peach. Plum is a little bit more generic. It could be a strategic call. I think it's a really smart call to go with something like that, where you can know that you can hit that note. Another thing that I think is really interesting I think is cool, Claire's using green cups. Lots of sensory science say that you shouldn't use green cups. I think that judges like this are used to maybe being people attempting to sway them. So by using green cups, I don't think it really affects you. I just think it's kind of a baller move to use a cup that maybe you shouldn't use because your espresso is that good.
Now, judges, let's move to your milk course. Now, for this course, I'll be pairing the same espresso recipe I've just used with milk in a ratio of 1 part espresso to 3 parts milk. And I've chosen to blend milks today. So I'm using 60% of a full-fat 4% milk with 40% of a freeze-distilled, lactose-free milk. And this combination of fats and sugars gives me harmonious balance in the drink, as well as creating flavor notes of light brown sugar and macadamia nut. I'm steaming the milk to 60 degrees Celsius to maximize its sweetness, and that will transform that note of baker's chocolate in the espresso to a white chocolate in your milk drink.
So something interesting here, the flavor calls light brown sugar, macadamia nut, and transforming something from one to white chocolate. I think this, to me, is maybe a little bit ahead of the curve in starting to treat the way we describe the milk course almost like a signature drink, to say how things are changing from one to the other. I think you can sort of see some of the consequence of using only one grinder, that these aren't as fruity notes, but I think the thing that's really smart here is they still sound delicious. I think Claire probably still nailed these notes, so I think I don't think she lost anything in it, but you can see sort of the trade-off sometimes without having a second grinder.
Now, the coffee's fermentation is not the only source of fermentation flavor in this course, because as milk ages, lactobacillus bacteria consumes the sugar within it. And this creates lactic acid, and it increases the acidity of milk as it ages. And so today I'm using a milk that is 5 days old, as I found that this had the best level of acidity to highlight the dried mango in my milk drink. This drink also has a coating texture that reminds me of melted ice cream. Now please stir these 5 times before popping your spoons again in those green jars just to your left. Now, many of the flavors that fermentation creates are not volatile when the coffee is green. That's for you. So, in order to enjoy those flavors at their best, the coffee has to be roasted. And as a roaster myself, that's where I come in. And for you, thank you very much. So I roasted this coffee to an end temperature of 212 degrees and a total roast time of 10.5 minutes. What this allowed me to do was lengthen the Maillard phase of the roast, enhancing this coffee's sweetness and texture. But by keeping that end temperature, there we are, thank you. By keeping that end temperature lower, I was able to retain the clarity of the fermentation fruit flavors in this coffee. And last but not least, thank you so much. Please enjoy those milk drinks.
Interesting milk course. We've seen fermented milks before. I think it'll become more and more of a thing. I think it fits Claire's theme really, really well. I haven't tried deeply fermented milk drinks. You tend to get a little bit more acid from them when they're a little bit older. This is a hard technique to pull off though, because the flavors that lactose bacillus that are found in milk create can often be quite sour. I think that Claire's doing something really smart here by using the lactose-free milk that is sweeter. It's probably balancing some of that sourness, which I think is really interesting and smart. This is the best fit for this technique in the theme that I've seen, because it fits right into that whole fermentation thing. You look at Claire's pours, they're really clean. Even the way she's pouring and adjusting her base, her crema base, you can tell she's a really, really good barista. These are not small things to do on finals when you're really trying to focus. And then lastly, I think it's really neat that Claire roasted this coffee. I think this is something, let's say she was competing in 2023, it would have gotten her even more points because you're really trying to show that you're ambassador. So I think by having a knowledge all the way from seed to cup and being able to say that you actually roasted the coffee gives that bit of credence and will allow a judge to score you higher on the new score sheets.
Thank you.
So you can see right there, that's one of the things I'm talking about in terms of strategy of changing. That once Claire served the milk drinks, she went back and did a deep clean on her station. So she probably got a 6 in terms of the head judge can score you sort of on your station management. She probably got a 6 there, or at least a 5. But I think that one thing I'd like to see in the future is baristas adapt and adjust their routines to account for the fact that suddenly there's an tech judge breathing down your neck. Nina might come over and check that. That's the head judge. But she might, at this point, she might be stuck there and she's not going to really check that out. So it could be a one quick wipe and then you're able to do something else. I don't know what that thing is, but I'm sure there are things there where you could adjust. Maybe it's a bit of extra customer service where you're refilling in extra water. Maybe you have a menu swap or something like that. But I think that as the competition progresses, having a set for each round could be something that's really interesting.
Now, many of the flavors that we've enjoyed today in this coffee are a direct result of Mauricio's intentional fermentation. This coffee with this yeast in this environment. And that inspired me for my signature drink because I wanted to elevate the flavor of this sidra whilst also transforming the experience using fermentation. So as you can probably see, there's a small black box in front of you. If you could please grab the handle, flip the lid, and rest it on the table for me. Perfect. Perfect. Inside, there are 2 samples. These are both just for your reference. They're not for scoring. Sample 1 is just blueberry juice. I would love you to please take a sip and then pop the cup back in the box for me. So as you can probably taste, it's juicy, it's sweet, but it's one-dimensional in its flavor. Now, sample 2 is my first signature drink. Pardon me, my first signature drink ingredient. What I call a sweet, lacto-fermented blueberry. Please take a sip for your reference. It's got a much more vibrant acidity and a much more complex flavor profile. So what I did was I added 200 grams of blueberries to half a gram of lactobacillus bacteria. I sealed it in an oxygen-free environment, just like this one, and I let it ferment for 48 hours at 25 degrees. The bacteria consumed the sugar in the blueberries and produced everything you tasted, lactic acid and flavor compounds. So when I add 36 grams of this to 6 shots of my chilled Cidra, it transforms the flavor experience, and they combine to create flavor notes of black currant and white jasmine tea.
So something interesting here that I actually love and I wish more people would do is letting people taste that comparison. Something that has happened to me a lot in barista competitions, you have a new idea that you've tested, you know that it changes things, but the judge doesn't really know that. They just have to take your word for it. I like these things where someone proves that it's different. Like this ingredient I'm giving you, I fermented it and it does taste different. I think that's really cool. I think it's really powerful. It takes a little bit of extra time, but I really appreciate it.
Next, I'll be adding hibiscus cold brew, 17 grams, made by adding 1 part hibiscus tea to 10 parts of cold water and brewing for 12 hours. This combines with the complex acidity of the Cidra and creates flavor notes of strawberry.
So we have hibiscus again. We saw this in Anthony's, where hibiscus is the sort of, it's technically, I guess, a flower, but it has a lot of red fruit notes. It has a lot of acidity. And so something interesting here is you'll see it come in strawberry. Strawberry is kind of a tart red fruit. I think there was a currant call earlier as well. All these things, I think, always look for ingredients that maybe taste like other ingredients or almost taste like other ingredients, because they'll make it easier to build a signature drink if it's just shifting things a bit to the point where hibiscus suddenly tastes like a different red fruit or a different tart thing. I think it's a really smart ingredient, and I think that's not random chance that both first place and third place are using that ingredient in their signature drink.
Now, many of the sugars that the blueberries had were consumed in that fermentation process. And so to restore synergy in the drink, as well as to elevate the sweetness of the Cidra, I'm making a 1-to-1 coconut sugar syrup, made by adding 1 part coconut sugar to 1 part water. When I add 15 grams of this to my signature drink, combining it with that blueberry, it creates new notes of fruity cacao nib. And lastly, 0.5 gram of salted orange blossom water, 5 parts of a 10% salt solution, 1 part orange blossom water. This complements all that stone fruit sweetness in the espresso, but combines in the blueberry ferment to create a new note of lemon peel. Now, this all started with Mauricio.
So another interesting thing here, and his signature ingredient that both 2 people in the top 3 use, is that saline solution. I think it boosts flavors, it can reduce bitterness. I think it's a really powerful ingredient to use. My guess is more people are using it than talk about it, because often if you have multiple ingredients, you don't have time to talk about it. The thing you're not going to mention is salt, because it doesn't always connect directly to your signature drink, because I think maybe every signature drink should have some amount of salt. In the same way, I think every signature drink should have some amount of sugar. Claire's using a different type of sugar, so she's able to speak about why. But if you're just using white sugar, lots of people don't mention it. So I would say maybe the 2 unspoken signature drink ingredients that are probably in almost every signature drink ingredient in signature drink in finals is either salt or sugar. I think earlier on, Claire mentioned a floral note that was coming from the blueberries. You can see here that she is using orange blossom. This is another trend that I've seen lots of people use, and you'll see it in the 2023 finals, where you have an ingredient that you attribute to a certain flavor change, but it may be a different one. And the judge actually can't speak to whether that happened or not, so they just take you at your face value. I think it's another smart thing where you're not doing it, there's no way to know what added what, and so if you put it into a different category, that can sort of help you out.
And so inspired by Mauricio, I will also be charging your drink with nitrogen. And this will allow me to create a velvety texture, a drink with wine-like tannin, and a long-lasting finish of that lemon peel. Now please take 3 sips to enjoy this drink, swirling between each sip so you can get all of those flavors. The drinking temperature will be 15 degrees Celsius, as I found that this had the best overall flavor synergy. This coffee with these ingredients and this fermentation create a unique flavor experience. But by using fermentation with intention and precision, we can create unique flavor experiences with any coffee. And that opens up opportunities for us as an industry. And I personally can't wait to see where fermentation will take flavor next. Thank you so much for your time.
Really well planned out. You can see she's under time. I can tell she's practiced this a whole lot. There are some other things that I really like about the set. I think if you look at her setup, it's not super complicated. And this is something, when I see a set that did this well, that is just on the simpler side, which is not a bad thing. It's super clean and looks nice. To me, it means that Claire's coffee is probably really, really good. I wish I could have tasted that coffee yet, because I imagine it's incredible. Her signature drink connected the entire theme. I think this is a really powerful lesson in picking a theme that lets you build a set really easily, because this is one of the few that I've seen where every single course connected back to the theme. And it often you sometimes have to hammer home with the judges, like, here's my theme, here's why the course works. But by picking something that is seemingly simple but hard to build really well in terms of fermentation, I think Claire did a good job. She found ingredients both in milk course and in SIG that worked really well. I think it's a really strong, powerful theme from someone that's clearly a great barista, and she did really well.